I don't want to take some high-minded spiritual attitude that, oh, it'll all pass and it's all in God's hands and it's all for a reason and everything will be fine. I think, I believe Martin Luther King was right when he said the arc of the moral universe bends toward justice. But I think what he left out, but would agree with, is we do a lot of the bending.
Mm.
We have to help that bend. And so if you care about the country, if you care about the culture, if you care about your neighbors and your communities, we have to take action now, do the right thing, say the right thing, stand up for what's right, because otherwise things will continue to get bad. And so for whatever karmic reasons, we're in it right now. And it's our karma, individually and collectively, and each of us has a role to play, whatever that is. And we need to play it.
Welcome to a Broaderlands podcast.
The opinions expressed on Broaderlands podcast are those of the guest speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of the host or Broaderlands podcast.
Philip, welcome to Broaderlands podcast. What an honor to have you back.
It's great to be back with you, Boo Boo.
This is the #1 podcast in Japan.
In Japan?
Yeah, I'm just playing around. It sounds good.
Oh, it's not true. I was going to say sayonara to everybody.
No, it's an honor to have you back. And you have a new book that's coming out, right? Karmic Relief?
Yes, it comes out in October of 2025.
How'd you come up with the name, since we're talking about it right now?
At first, before I thought of writing a book about karma, I used the term karmic relief just in conversation once, because at the time, it goes back a ways, comic relief was a thing, a big thing. And so I was talking about karma to somebody and something happened. I said, it's karmic relief. And it got a laugh. And I thought, oh, that could be a book title someday. And then years later, I decided, yeah, I should do that.
It could be in our dictionary someday, thanks to you.
You know what's interesting? I Googled karmic relief the other day to see if my book shows up, even though it's not yet published. And what came up through the AI on the Google was like the term karmic relief, and they defined it as, having relief from bad karma and all that. And I thought, I didn't even know that was a thing. Wow. So.
Me either, until you said it right now. So
yeah.
I thought it was going to be like Thich Nhat Hanh, intervene. They just put that in the dictionary, I believe.
Oh, maybe. Yeah, maybe I'll have that honor someday.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. You write in your book, karma is a part of our vocabulary. We know very little about what it really means. I know it means action, but maybe you can elaborate at a deeper level.
Well, you know more than most people, because the literal translation of the Sanskrit karma is simply action. And that's what it meant in the earliest Vedic literature, just was a synonym for action. And you see that even in the Bhagavad Gita, the term action is used, karma is used to indicate action in the world. But the larger connotation that karma applies to the sort of laws of cause and effect. So it's not just your action. The larger meaning of karma is that our actions have consequences. Mm-hmm. And whatever we do will reverberate and have an effect throughout the environment, not just immediately, but to the edge of the universe. And it will come back to us. There will be the consequences of our actions, whether good or bad, will come back to us. That's the meaning. And most of the Eastern sages who wrote about it, the modern ones, borrow from the New Testament and say the analogy to reaping what we sow. As you sow, so shall you reap. That's a sort of shorthand for what we mean by karma. When I said it's misunderstood, I mean that in everyday language, it's often misused or incompletely understood. It's much more nuanced than people think. Otherwise, my book would be a one-sentence book.
In your book, you mentioned, I think it was in your book, where I heard you talk about this. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm a Swiftie, Taylor Swift. And she has a song that talks about karma.
It's titled, the title is Karma. And it's a fairly recent song. Alicia Keys has a song titled Karma. John Lennon had a song called Instant Karma 50 years ago, 40, whatever. Willie Nelson has a song with the word karma in the title. It's been used a lot. And usually, if you look at the lyrics of the songs with karma in the title, that's one of the things people kind of get wrong about karma. They use the word usually when something bad happens. Oh, it's your karma coming back to you. So in the pop songs, it's usually, you done me wrong, karma's going to get you. It's going to come back to you. But in truth, and Taylor Swift gets this in her song, it's also about the good things. Everything we do comes back to us. So our good actions come back to us in favorable circumstances, favorable results, consequences. We never think of it. When good things happen, we don't say, oh, it's my karma. We just take it for granted. So when bad things happen, that we say, oh, what is the karma here? But it applies to everything. Everything we do has karmic consequences.
Yeah, thank you. I know you're familiar with, I can't say his name properly. I never have over the years.
Iswaran.
Yeah.
Eknath Iswaran, yeah.
Yeah, he's the first one that really taught me. Well, Yogananda too, but I love his writings. Did you happen to know him?
No, I never met him,
Okay.
but I admire his work.
What are some of the better translations for the Bhagavad Gita?
Well, his is one. Yogananda's is another, but it's like 1,200 pages long of commentary. Yeah, but the first one I read, and I still refer to, is by Swami Prabhavananda in collaboration with Christopher Isherwood. And one of the reasons I like that is that Isherwood was a world-class novelist, and Swami Prabhavananda was a world-class scholar of Vedanta. So the combination works. My first teacher was Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. He wrote a great translation and commentary, but only the first 6 chapters. He never got around to the rest. There's a few others that I draw on all the time. A modern scholar named Graham Schweig, whom I know. Another scholar, this goes back to the 60s, Juan Mascaro, Spanish scholar. An American journalist who was an expert on these things named Winthrop Sargent. So I tend to draw on those.
Yeah, thank you. Krishna, in the teachings of Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, what's the main theme of karma in the Bhagavad Gita?
There's a number of references to it. As a synonym for action, Krishna talks about that inaction is not an option in the world, that we have responsibility, and responsibility is an individual matter. Each of us has in this context, you have to also discuss the term dharma. But we have responsibilities and roles to play in a responsible way. And avoiding action is not an option. So that's one context. But it's also, there's places where he explains what I just said, that every action has consequences, and we're responsible for whatever happens and whatever we do and whatever we say. It's not fatalism. It's not determinism. We have the free will to correct our karma, change our karma, and act in a way that will bring good results, not just for us, but for everything in the environment and the people that we care about. And there's another section of the Gita where he says something about karma that's really important, and I emphasize this in Karmic Relief, that the details of karma are unfathomable. They're not knowable by the human intellect, because the reverberations of everything we do, and it's not just everything we do, but everything we think, every intention, and every action has consequences. And we're constantly feeding into the pool of karma. And so is everybody we're associated with. And our karma interacts with their karma. And natural events in the world, and communal karma, and family karma. And it can get so complex that it's a futile effort to try to say, this is happening because I did this in the past. It's too complicated. You can't identify every cause. Because things are multi-causal, for one thing. And you can't predict how karma is going to come back. So if you tell a lie now, it doesn't mean somebody's going to lie to you tomorrow. It could mean it comes back to you in some other way, then you can't trace it back to something you did. Sometimes you can. You lie to somebody, they find out about it, they smack you in the face. That's legitimate karmic repercussion. But most things are very complex. So there's a passage in the Gita where Krishna says, depending on the translation, the ways of karma are unfathomable, or they can't be known. They can't be detected by the human mind.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Looking at my life growing up, like I grew up in San Pedro, California, right in the docks of Los Angeles, down there.
But near the ocean, that's good.
Yeah, near the ocean. But I was hanging around with the neighborhood gang members, and I was a thug, and just really living in a way where I didn't really take responsibility for my life, like in a spiritual sense. That's what spirituality taught me to do, is take responsibility for my own thoughts and my own actions. I wasn't living that way. I just didn't care. Had a lot of mental conditioning, but but I would speak victimese. Life ain't treating me well. Everything's blaming everything else. But I'm living in this negative environment, causing destruction, hurting other gang members. Like I knew something was going to happen to me if I hurt another gang member. There was going to be a consequence, and that's karma too, right?
Of course. Yes, indeed it is. Those are the obvious forms of karma. But then it gets subtle, because sometimes, okay, let's use your example. You're in a gang. You have gang members who are your buddies. You do the same things, but different things happen to each of you. Yeah. One of you gets caught, the other one doesn't. One of you gets beat up, the other one doesn't. That's karma too. How do you explain the difference? Is it just luck? Karma would say, it's more complicated than that.
So my question is, has science proven karma to be true? If not, we can find it in our life, like we're just explaining now. Is it like does it work within the laws of nature? I guess that's what I'm trying to ask.
That's a very good question. And I delve into it in my book. As far as I could tell, there's no way of proving that karma is a real thing in the largest sense of the word. Some people say, well, it's obvious, just like you said, if I do wrong to somebody, it's going to come back to me. Well, that's assuming they find out. What if they don't find out and you get away with it? How do we explain that? You do something wrong. The world is filled. If you look at the surface of things, there's all kinds of people doing wrong all the time. They don't seem to be punished by it. Some of them die rich and happy. And then there's all the mass of people who live good lives and do virtuous things, and they get sick and they die and they suffer loss and disease. And how do we explain this? We can't. So karma seems real on a certain level, but in a larger sense, the evidence isn't there unless you take a leap of faith and you imply that it is. I doubted it myself, even while I was practicing yoga and meditating and accepting certain premises of Indian and yogic philosophy. Karma was always, I had trouble with it because of the evidence in the world, like I said. But after a while, it started to make intuitive sense. And if you take the long run picture, I finally said, okay, intuitively, I can accept it. Not on faith, but as an intuition and in a certain way of trusting the perspective that's offered by the teachings that were birthed in India and became Hinduism and Buddhism and yoga and Vedanta and all that. But the other factor is, you asked about science. As science develops, if you look at, the most contemporary findings, it starts to not prove that karma exists by any means, but at least give us a framework where it's more plausible. And by that I mean it's unequivocal in science now that everything is connected, even things at a distance. Any quantum physicist will tell you, yeah, we've shown, some change happens to an atom and it affects things at a great distance. And everything we do, at least on a physical level, reverberates. And we can't see the consequences. The consequences are greater, close by than it is, on the moon or whatever. But that's provable, that everything's connected. Not just all humans, but all creatures and everything. So that gives us a little bit of a plausibility, that because karma couldn't work if everything wasn't connected. So we know scientifically everything's connected. And ultimately, since it's unprovable, you have a choice. You either accept that karma is real, or you accept that it's not, or you're an agnostic about it. And in the end, I decided I would lean in the direction that karma exists, because if I do, I'll behave better in the world. If I think, okay, I could possibly get away with this, but on some level, it's going to come back to me. I may make a different choice about my actions, my speech, my, how I perceive the world. And so my feeling is that the more people willing to make that leap of faith, the better off the world will be.
But if we don't believe in karma, are we going to hell? I'm just playing.
I'll leave that to the church.
You write in your book about you've had karma on your mind for over a half a century.
Yeah.
And that's a long time. You've been
I'm old.
No, I didn't mean it like that. I meant like you've been really exploring karma for over 50 years.
Well, I've been exploring Eastern philosophy and the spiritual teachings from India for 50 years, and you can't avoid karma in that context.
Yeah, so being from New York, what drew you to the Eastern philosophy?
Well, it didn't have anything to do with being in New York, except maybe, there's a certain thing about kids who grow up in New York being skeptical, maybe even cynical, being of, independent, wise-ass frame of mind. So I didn't accept conventional reality, and I didn't accept what was given to me as the accepted ways of seeing the world. And that led me on a search. But I was hardly alone back in the late 1960s. I was a young man, one of hundreds of thousands or millions of us who were exploring different ways of seeing the world. And in that context, pre-internet, books were the main medium of exchange and conversation. And somehow we got a hold of books about Eastern philosophy. At first it was Zen Buddhism, then it was yoga and Vedanta. And I was just drawn to it for whatever karmic reasons. It all made sense to me. It helped me make sense of the universe, transformed my life for the better. So it became a framework for my life.
Have you seen it evolve over time from Hinduism, Buddhism, and the yoga traditions to today's understanding?
Well, they're always evolving, and adapting. Certain certain truths are truths because they don't change. And these ancient revelations or insights that were recorded in the ancient texts, they seem to hold up, even with the advance of science and evidence. They hold up, but they take different expressions as culture changes, time changes. So you mentioned Yogananda earlier, and I wrote a biography of him. He, like all the other teachers who came to the West, he adapted the traditional eternal teachings, what's called Sanatana Dharma. Buddhists have their version of, unchanging truths and insights, but you adapt the way they're expressed in the language that's used and what is the examples that are used, the metaphors that are used to describe these teachings. When you go to a different culture with different values, a different period of history, and so they continue to be adapted. Like if you go to a yoga studio now, you'll see things being discussed in a different way than you would have 50 years ago or 100 years ago. 100 years ago, there wouldn't have been yoga studios, for example. But so they change in that way, but the core principles, the core teachings seem to, they don't change. They hold up, just like laws of nature do. Like gravity holds up, even though physics has evolved beyond what Newton knew. But the basic principles of gravity or thermodynamics, they hold up in their limited way.
Not going off topic, but the Upanishads. Those are some profound teachings. Do we know who actually wrote those? Because even if I look at Miser Eckhart, it seems like he experienced some of the stuff these people were experiencing in the Upanishads. It's like this universal consciousness they tapped into.
Yes, you're right. And what you're alluding, let me just first answer the first question. The Upanishads, which are the sort of culmination or the last of what we think of as the Vedic teachings of India, they express, along with the Gita, the core teachings of Vedanta philosophy. There's many Upanishads, and they come to us over a long span of time. And most of them are in the form of a sage or a seer or guru speaking to disciples. And those gurus are identified. So the Upanishads are thought, in a sense, they're the authors. But who put them in writing, and before they were in writing, who transmitted them orally and constructed the stories? I'll leave that to academics who like to study those things. But what you alluded to is the more important part of what you said, is because you brought in Meister Eckhart. You could just as well have brought in St. John the Divine or Teresa of Avila or any of the Christian mystics or the Jewish mystics of certain periods in history, or the Sufis, the Islamic mystics, Rumi and the others. What you're alluding to here is what scholars call the perennial philosophy or perennialism, the principal insight that what the mystical teachings of all the traditions throughout the world, throughout every time period, if you look at what the mystical writers and speakers, poets, how they describe their spiritual experiences, they'll use different language, they'll have different frameworks, different belief systems, different methods. But when they describe their experiences, the descriptions are remarkably the same, independent of where on the earth they lived, what time frame they lived, what religion they were raised in, how they prayed, how they meditated. The experience is the same or similar. And that insight that certain scholars had who studied these things came to be known as perennialism or the perennial philosophy. The most famous expression of that was Aldous Huxley's book called The Perennial Philosophy. And that's an important insight. It separates out what scholars would call the exoteric parts of religion. Ex meaning external. So rituals, belief systems, dogma, doctrine, interpretations of history, all that sort of stuff. When you focus on that, you get all the differences. That's where people fight and they argue who's telling the truth, who has the great revelation, what's the true religion. If you look at the esoteric, the inner dimension of what people actually experience, whether they're sitting in a church or a mosque or a synagogue or a temple, what they experience is the same. And that's where you find unity. And that insight that you alluded to is really important in this day and age, that we focus on those aspects of religion instead of the things that people fight over. So Meister Eckhart could be sitting in a room with Buddha and Shankara and Rumi and laughing at these people arguing over theology and belief systems.
I've had these experiences within a few years of my awakening and tapping into the unity consciousness. And when I say this, people probably think I'm crazy or laugh at me, but I had a lot of mysticism come to me. I'll be sleeping and I would have these characters being inside my brain, like it felt like in my being right near me. So I had a lot of these experiences where I started, like Meister Eckhart, for an example, he would say, theologians will argue, the mystics will understand.
That's
you
right.
know, and they understand each other. And you see Thomas Merton and Thich Nhat Hanh being best friends, feeling closer to each other than their own religious
exactly right
friends. So it's like, because it's that unity consciousness that I want to say we tapped into, because I've tapped into that. It's also a state of being. It's not just like a one-time thing. It's the way I live.
Yeah.
So
And that's
yeah,
another thing that's terribly important. It's the spiritual experience that transforms people.
yeah,
To a certain degree, adopting a belief system can change people, but it doesn't always change them for the better.
yeah. I think it
Unless
changes.
they,
No, I think
yeah,
it changes us, but also we have to live on a spiritual basis to continue to have these experiences and do
that's
some
right.
inner work and healing, the integration that takes place.
That's right. And it's
Yeah.
not automatic. And sometimes the transformations that come with spiritual experiences fade away. And, you have to, that's why spiritual practice and learning certain disciplines and techniques is so important. That's why all the spiritual teachings advocate regular practice, what's called sadhana
Mm.
in the East.
That's why I love Mac D. Fox too. I talked to him and we really clicked. His teachings came on
Yeah.
early on, his writings. And I was telling Elaine Pagels, I was telling her, I feel like whoever wrote the Gospel of John had some understanding of the Hindu philosophies,
Ah,
because it seems like the Gospel of John, and no one knows who wrote it, right? It seems like there's a lot of some influence maybe from Krishna, or maybe it was that universal consciousness, but there's definitely some kind of connection
yeah.
there.
What did she say?
I forget exactly what she said, but she said it was very possible. I think something
Yes,
like that.
and she's a great scholar of early Christianity, especially the esoteric stuff. And there are records of people from what we think of as the Holy Land and early and Greece uh, finding their way to what was then part of India, mostly now what's Pakistan, but to where the yogis were in the Himalayas. There's recordings of people meeting these great yogis and rishis, including Alexander the Great,
Yeah.
that his adventures were recorded well. So there were trading ships going back and forth. If you go to India, South India, there's one of the oldest synagogues in the world in a port city of Kochi, that's said to go back to the days of Solomon, when the Hebrews were on trading ships and they found their way to India and established, enclaves there. So there's always been some back and forth. So it's plausible that some of the gospel writers and even Jesus himself had some contact, and there's theories about this. And I don't know what's true and what's not, but, it's plausible.
Yeah, there's some pretty stories about him going to India, and that sounds like my friend Suzanne Olsen, who passed away. She wrote a book, Jesus in Kashmir, years ago. But yeah, yeah, I don't know. It sounds good. Maybe that Library of Alexandria too, where there was a connection. Um,
Yeah, and there's, some of the, I think Pythagoras or some of the great Greek philosophers had some contact with, in these trading ships that went back and forth and overland journeys, to what's now Pakistan. That was then the uh, sort of Indian Vedic Himalayas.
mhm. Going back to karma and studying different religions and philosophies, do you find the same principle in all the religions, maybe just not worded as karma?
Yeah, well, as I said earlier, famously, Jesus said, "You reap what we sow." Well, that's indicates
Yeah.
something like karma, whether it would be explained exactly the same way. But in every spiritual tradition, there's always this notion that there are consequences to what we do and what we say and how we treat people. And in some instances, the consequences will have to do with whether you end up in heaven or hell, or how what your reincarnated life would be like. So those are two very different models, but they all propose that we're not going to get away with anything in the long run. Now, which model is true, or is there some way in which they're all true? I don't know. But something like it is there. But in the Western religious tradition, it kind of breaks down. If you, I don't want to get too theological here, but I talk about in the opening chapters of Karmic Relief that one of the reasons people turn to the East and to concepts like karma is it's much more plausible than the model where there's a paternal deity who acts like a judge and is judging, every action. He knows when you've been naughty, he knows when you've been nice, and, doles out sentences or rewards. That became so implausible to people, but they want to, there's a sense in which the universe might be a fair and honorable place, and karma is a more rational way of explaining that possibility than that, God's going to make sure everything works out in the end.
One thing that resonates with me, what you just said earlier, and you've said before, is that it's probably more healthier and safer to live as there is karma versus not believing in it, because it helps me be more mindful and more aware of my actions.
Yeah. And especially little subtle things where someone may not know. I mean, I think of, when I was a kid growing up in the streets of Brooklyn, when maybe I was 10 or 11, and I saw somebody shoplift some candy. And I said, I'm going to try that. And I thought, but what if I get caught? Well, maybe I won't get caught. And I remember going through this in my head as I stood in the store. And I did it, and I got caught. But my friend didn't. So, you walk away and you conclude either he was lucky and I wasn't, or he was better at it. Or, whatever. You can come up with explanations for these things. But I do remember thinking, maybe I shouldn't do that again. And thinking about karma has a similar kind of thing going on. You think, yeah, but what if karma is real? That's going to come back to me. Even if the only consequence is I feel guilty. That's not healthy for me. That's tough to live with. Some people can do bad things and not care. They're psychopaths, or don't have the same conscience. So they won't even feel guilt or shame or anything like that, or apprehension. But they may be afraid of getting caught. And that's hard to live with too. So there's advantages to behaving well in the world and doing the right thing, but just knowing that is usually not enough, because there's a whole lot of people who were raised in very moral and ethical households and went to church or synagogue or mosque every day, and they're still, the jails are filled with people who were taught to do the right thing. So why we don't can be complicated. But believing that you might pay for wrong action, or that you'll benefit from doing the right thing, that can change one's mind.
Yeah, thank you. Karma yoga, how does that help? Selfless service, isn't that what that means? Selfless service?
Yeah, that's the implication. Karma yoga is the yoga of action, for where, and you can, the word karma is there in both the sense of it meaning action, but also in the larger sense of by doing service, by doing the right thing, by doing well by others, by performing action without obsession over what you're going to get out of it, or what you're going to achieve, by being of value to those you're serving, to those you affect, that has good consequences. I don't like to use the word reward or punishment, because that sounds like a legal system, or something, or somebody's handing out candy. I think it's It's more like every action has consequences, and good actions will have good consequences. And you benefit from performing your duty in the world, performing actions that are accrued to the benefit of others. You will benefit too, because you're creating good karma for yourself and because you are reducing the impact of your ego.
I love that. I want to ask you some. I got sober in 2009 and I walked into Alcoholics Anonymous, right? And there you have 12 steps. And I love the 12 steps. They're universal principles that are found in, every tradition and religion. Well, I learned how to live these principles. They teach about being of service, going to meetings early, have some kind of service commitments, and do the work, do the inner work, the 12 steps, get a sponsor, follow some direction, and your life will change. Well, in the AA Big Book, it says something like, are these extravagant promises? They talk about the promises, and it says, we think not, they are being fulfilled among us, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, but they'll always materialize if we work for it. In the karmic terms, are these effects of the cause? Like, is this all because I'm doing different actions? I'm being more selfless, going back to karma yoga, more selfless service, doing some inner work, taking responsibility, focusing on gratitude versus complaining or being a victim,
Yeah, all
taking
that.
responsibility.
Absolutely. I mean, what you described is a formula, one of many, for virtuous action, for behaving honorably and being of value to your fellow human beings, and of putting service above personal gain. There are rewards. I use the word rewards. There are benefits to be gained from that. You benefit. And 12 steps is a good example because it's provable. And you could look at the ethical teachings of any religious tradition. Those who live by them tend to have, much happier lives. They get along better with other people. They're rewarded. They just look at business. In the business world, everybody's out to make a profit and all that. But those who do it honorably tend to, have more, even if they have a little less success than the ruthless, cutthroat people, they have better relationships and more friends, and they have the respect of their peers, as opposed to, being held in contempt because you lie or cheat. So there's value in that, and that's a good example of it.
So some people might ask the question, where is God in all this?
Yeah,
karma?
where? You tell me.
Well, I mean, it really comes down to the individual, right?
Sure.
That's why I like the teachings of the Buddha.
Yes, and whenever people, I try not to use the God word in my talking and my writing because, I'm comfortable when certain people use it. If I read Meister Eckhart and he uses his language is translated as God, or to use your example, Matthew Fox, or other contemporary teachers, even Eastern teachers, even Hindu, gurus and stuff will occasionally use the word God when they're speaking English, because that's a reasonable translation. But they don't mean some being, some, almighty deity who's making decisions and intervening in our lives. They mean something more abstract, something, that might be called, that Brahman in Sanskrit, or Godhead, as opposed to, the Almighty Lord. So depending on what people mean by the word God, it either holds up for me or it just falls apart. And what we talked about before, about consequences in the universe and whether the universe is fair or not. Theologians have been arguing about this for thousands of years. It's like, how do you, and the core question is, if there's a God who has a personality and volition, and that God knows everything, is omniscient, and that God is all-loving, how do you explain human suffering? How do you explain the inequities of the world and the fact that good people suffer? This goes back to the book of Job and years and many centuries before that. It's unanswerable. You can't reconcile that, except by saying, well, God gave everybody free will, and so go for it. And you'll reap what you sow. So which brings us back to karma. But, and so that inconsistency is one of the things that separates the Western religion, the usual understanding of Western religion and the term God, from the more mystical teachings, where if they use the word God at all, it's something abstract and universal and not a being with a personality.
Well, in the Gospel of Thomas, and even Eckhart Tolle wrote about this, and Marianne Williamson, but in the not Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Philip, there's a line where it says, "Man made God in the image of man." Which goes back to the
people have been
personality.
saying, that's interesting, because philosophers have been saying that forever.
Yeah.
We created God in our own image. We just take, our qualities and imagine the ultimate in those intelligence. We all have intelligence. The ultimate intelligence is omniscience. We all have love, the capacity for love. The ultimate of that is an all-loving God who loves, everybody. So we project that and create those beings. And you could say the same thing about the Hindu tradition, which has so many deities and so many, personalized, aspects of the divine, but they all recognize that those are expressions of one eternal being that's transcendent to everything, not, but has different manifestations.
That's why I like in the Gita where it talks about the self with the capital S.
Yeah.
That makes more sense to me because there's no separation,
Right. And that's the core teachings of the Upanishads and the Gita, that our ultimate identity, what we are, is what everybody else is. Beyond our egos, beyond our bodies, beyond our personalities, the small self exists, the big self. And it's interesting how when translated to English, one of the devices people came up with is to capitalize self in that way. It might have been Atman in the original. So they separated the small self, the small individual self, the boo-boo and the Phil, from the universal self, which is what we all are deep down in our, infinite, eternal being. And, it's not just a philosophy, it's not just speculation, it's experienceable. And that's where methods like meditation and come in, that inner being can be experienced.
Yeah, I took a few classes a couple years back, and I took a religious class, and the professor got pissed off because he was Christian, but I wasn't disrespecting him. I said, that's what Jesus meant when he said, I and my Father are one. And that's what the Swami's been saying. It's self-realization. There's nothing to argue about.
He didn't like that because he wants Jesus to be the only Son of God. That's where things break down. So if you go to India, there's all these great stories about the missionaries going to India to convert people to Christianity. And these people in the villages saying, "Oh, that's interesting. Oh, this Jesus guy sounds like a great yogi, a great guru. Oh, yes, I'll take that statue. Thank you very much. I'll put it right next to my statue of Krishna and Ganesha and with all the other great deities, and I'll honor him." And they'll say, no, you got to get rid of those other things. It's only Jesus. Well, why? So there's all these great stories like that. But if you go to India, Jesus is revered in India. As some people put him up on the same level as Krishna and Buddha, as great, incarnations of the divine. Only none of them is the only one. And some of them it's enough to make him a great holy man from another part of the world, a great yogi like Vyasa and Shankara and all the other honored yogis. So, but they will easily accept that.
And that creates more unity versus disunity.
Yeah. Well, you familiar with Yogananda. He was a big fan of Christ.
Philip, when I first started going there, and I'd be quiet, I'll go by myself to Pacific Palisades, and I'd sit there, and I swear, maybe I shouldn't swear, but I seen the whole lineup, right? And I would see Yogananda's image, and like it was like alive to me, like he was like showing me it was him that was guiding me. And I just felt like it was just vibrant. It was like versus the other pictures. And I think that was his way of explaining that I'm here. I'm kind of help guiding you.
Oh, well, that's, and you're not the only one who has had such experiences. And of course, many other people, most people will go to the lake shrine in the Palisades and have a beautiful contemplative experience, but won't have that kind of interaction. It's, that's your karma. You have obviously some association with Yogananda as a teacher and the lineage that resonated in that way for you. For some other people, it will be a different guru, a different teacher, a different tradition. And that's one of the beautiful things about the diversity of spiritual expressions. Something for everybody.
Yeah, interesting, because when I was a little boy, I would I remember seeing Indiana Jones, and just that environment alone, I felt like I lived in a place like that in India. So like that, I felt there was an inner knowing of this.
Yeah.
Like I've been there before. This is too familiar, even in ancient China. But what makes it interesting is when I had my awakening, the teachings came to me. They started to find me. It's kind of like that Rumi quote: "What you're seeking is seeking you."
Yeah.
And I didn't know it. It's an unconscious level, in my opinion.
And Meister Eckhart said something very similar.
Interesting. I guess my question is karma and reincarnation. How do you connect that, and what's the whole purpose?
I was waiting for you to get to this, boo-boo. You alluded to it. I had to really think about this in the book, and I didn't want to devote a lot of space to theories of reincarnation and details about reincarnation. But you cannot discuss karma seriously without taking into account reincarnation, because ultimately, if we're confined to one life, it's hard to accept karma in its full meaning, because too many people do right and do good and suffer and die young and all that. And too many people do bad and live happy, prosperous lives. So without considering the possibility that they brought to this life karma from the past, and that they will bring into subsequent lives karma that is still to be played out, it's hard to fully accept karma. So they go together in ways that's impossible to separate. Some people are okay with, well, I'll just accept a certain limited sense of karma because I can't buy reincarnation. And they'll find a way to make that work. But if you really think about it, it's hard to make it work. But if you accept the possibility of many lives, it turns existence into a kind of school where you learn the right lessons. Karma comes back, and if you learn the right lessons from those consequences of previous actions, you'll behave differently in the future. You'll pass the exam. You'll go on to the next lesson, the next grade. So you have many lifetimes to learn, just like you progress from kindergarten to, senior year of school, and et cetera. You grow, you evolve, you mature, you learn. So it's a model of learning as opposed to reward and punishment in one, life. And that holds up to me. That makes sense to me. Can it be proved? No. But there are indications, there's a good deal of research that really points to the strong possibility that we outlive multiple lives. But that's, you can't convince anybody of that easily. But if you're open to the possibility, it makes karma and the consequences of karma much more plausible. So you think, well, I can't explain why this is happening from my memories of this life or anything I know about your past. Might be some influence from previous lives that we carried into this one. We carry the effects of karma into this life, and we'll carry karma into the next. And presumably we'll learn along the way.
That spiritual amnesia or state of forgetfulness when we're born is just pretty interesting. Just how we just forget everything.
And people I've seen it, people say, well, if I lived in previous lives, why don't I remember them? And the answer is usually, well, some people do, like Buddha was said to have done and others. But that it's a blessing that we don't, and that's built into the system, because if we remembered everything about past lives, that's a big burden to carry. And, we have to learn the right lesson, not look back to previous lives. And a lot of gurus will say, yeah, previous lives exist, future lives exist. Don't waste too much time thinking about it. Because, you can't know for sure what your previous life was or what the circumstances were. And the main thing is, how are you acting now? One of the beautiful things about karma, one of the reasons I wrote the book, is it accepts the influence of the past. It accepts that the present will have an influence on the future, but it puts all of our attention on right now. How are we going to experience this moment, this event, this situation, these circumstances? How are we going to frame it? How are we going to respond to it? And the answer to that question will determine our karma in the future. So if something were to, happen outside, I'm looking out my window now, and I see somebody, suffering. If I were to say, oh, who cares? I'm reacting to something in the moment. And it's one of the other things that you often hear that's a misconception. It's a misuse of the term karma. People see suffering by a person or a group, a calamity or whatever, and they'll say, well, it's their karma, something from the past coming back. And I'll say, yes, but how you know about that now. You see them suffering, and how you respond to their suffering is going to create karma for you. So if you're indifferent or if you're cruel, that's going to create karma. If you try to help them, if you have compassion, that creates a different karma. So, every moment we're creating our karma.
That's why I like hearing the people that have near-death experiences. They talk about the life review, and they
Yeah.
see clips of their lives and how it affected themselves and everyone around them. And
Yeah.
it's like, wow. I mean, because you can't. I mean, I think that's what a spiritual life is, and that's what the 12 steps taught me, to have a life review throughout the day upon awakening, thinking about my day ahead, and when I retire at night, I'm constantly reviewing my actions, my
Yeah.
behavior. Do I owe
Yeah.
someone amends? Could I did something better? Just it's become second nature for me. So
Yeah, it's one of the exercises I have in my book and Yogananda did that. He would have his disciples say, before you go to bed, think back at the day. What could you do better? And do it tomorrow.
I'm going to ask you a couple more quick questions before we go, because this one, especially this one, because it's really intriguing. Just the term alone, karmic loops. I'd love for you to share what a karmic loop is and how do we break free from those?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think what you're referring to is that we have a tendency to make the same mistakes over and over again. I mean, and you don't have to believe in karma to accept that, because any good psychotherapist will tell you we keep making the same mistakes over and over again, and some of us are very aware of it. Oh, I did it again. I thought I'd learned my lesson, but I didn't. I lost my temper and I said I'd never do that again, or I entered a new relationship and the same stuff is happening in the past that happened in the past. And those are clues to a certain, entrenched karma that's going to keep coming back to us until we learn the lesson and behave differently and react to it differently. It's like, you failed the driving test, you got to take it again, and those are clues. And yeah, we have loops, we have patterns, some good, some bad, but they're clues, they're lessons, they're things to be learned from that insight. And, that's one of the ways karma expresses itself.
I appreciate that. I'm going to ask you one more quick question on karma and looking at our collective behavior in our country right now.
Oh,
You see a lot of, people, whether it's with politics, culture, religion, race, and how we're treating each other right now. How is karma shaping our nation's future? And what guidance, spiritual guidance or words of wisdom can you give us knowing about karma and human behavior?
boo-boo, to be perfectly honest with you, that's beyond my pay grade. I address in the last chapter of Karmic Relief the concept of collective karma, family karma, group karma, ethnic, religious, all the categories that we're members of groups. And then there's national karma. Every day, whether people use the term karma or some other framework, everybody is wondering, how did we get into this mess? How did things get this bad? And I don't know that there's an easy answer to any of that. All I know is I don't want to take some high-minded spiritual attitude that, it'll all pass and it's all in God's hands and it's all for a reason and everything will be fine. I think, I believe Martin Luther King was right when he said the arc of the moral universe bends toward justice. But I think what he left out, but would agree with, is we do a lot of the bending. We have to help that bend. And so if you care about the country, if you care about the culture, if you care about your neighbors and your communities, we have to take action now, do the right thing, say the right thing, stand up for what's right, because otherwise things will continue to get bad. And so for whatever karmic reasons, we're in it right now. And it's our karma, individually and collectively, and each of us has a role to play, whatever that is. And we need to play it.
Philip, thanks for coming on. I'm going to end something I found on your website. We're always planting karmic seeds. Our task is to choose the right seeds and plant them skillfully in the right way, at the right time, under the right conditions. Karma is a profoundly useful idea. A Karmic Relief is a profoundly useful book. If you're listening, go get his book. And how can we find your links and more about you?
philipgoldberg.com, Philip with one L. My Substack, which is called Practical Spirituality. I write on there all the time and communicate. And my podcast, where I interview interesting spiritual teachers and leaders, including some of the ones Boo Boo knows. And that's called Spirit Matters. And it's on mindbodyspirit.fm. Those are the three best ways. Thanks for asking, Boo Boo.
No, thank you, and namastizzle. Thanks for coming on, Philip. Always a pleasure.
It's a pleasure. Namaste to you and all your listeners.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Take good care. Bye.
Just know we out here. Know we out here working in a major way. Had to speak on it just to make a play. Any given subject, know we make a way. Time to level up on a day-to-day. Know we out here working for the greater good. Expand your mind, broaden your lens the way you should. From the stars to the galaxy to speak on spirituality. Higher understanding for the neighborhood.